Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 19th of September 2024. I was going to put this video out there yesterday and glad I didn't. I want to discuss the recent attacks in Lebanon, but also want to emphasize that although I want to provide you guys with news on current war and conflicts, whether that be breaking news and or news updates, I don't want to be jumping the gun, which is what would have happened yesterday if I'd have provided you with an update on the situation in Lebanon, because there was in fact a second wave of attacks yesterday. So I'm kind of glad that I stayed patient. If you've watched any of my videos, guys, you'll know that we're not going to be beating around the bush. Let me tell you what comes to mind when I heard about those attacks in Lebanon yesterday, or on Tuesday and yesterday. Sophisticated, certainly, new, and the first attack of its kind that we know of. Instantly hitting mainstream news, and for obvious reasons, because the impact was on the public stage and was meant to be. I also see a clear-cut message here as well. I have to choose my I do have to choose my words carefully because for obvious reasons, everyone's making their own assumptions and they're finger pointing the people responsible. So with that, this is what I think. 100% Israel are responsible for this, but then I think we all know that anyway. But, and this is a big but, I believe it's orchestrated by the West. What you're going to see here in the coming months is Israel becoming a proxy war for the Middle East. I've said it in previous videos that wars are fought over land, religion, minerals, but also there has to be a fight against terrorism, certainly. And certainly since the Twin Towers came down in 2001. Terrorists do not fit into the Western way of life or the Western world. And it seems to be more prominent in the Middle East. And I believe the reason for that is because of religion. I'm not going to get sucked into religion, guys, because it's a huge subject and a subject that, the human race have created for themselves. Right across the globe, for thousands of years, humans have created their own interpretation of religion that best suits them and their way of life with their own sets of rules that one is expected to abide by. There are over 8 billion people alive on Earth, and not one of them knows whether there is a God or not. Each and every one of us will know whether there's a God or not when we breathe our last breath on this earth. But enough about that. My point here is that we're talking about terrorism, the Middle East, and unfortunately, these subjects draws in religion. So the West sees certain breeds of terrorists a greater threat than others, shall we say. The West have been fighting terrorism, like I say, certainly since 2001, but it's definitely years before that. We look at terrorists in certain regions as being fanatical, with beliefs that are deeply rooted to the bone, whether that be, through losing their families as a result of military strikes by the West on targets in their region, and or the beliefs of, scripture written by those so-called gods and prophets. Either way, we have two sides, the terrorists and those that are fighting against terrorism. Now, this next point I'm going to make is probably going to be the only point, or certainly the most important point you need to take away from this video today. Under no circumstances can or will the West, or those fighting against terrorism, allow any terrorist country or state, a terrorist group or individual to be in possession of a nuclear weapon. And that is it. No matter what your beliefs are on the attacks of the World Trade Centers in 2001, whether that be a highly sophisticated and well orchestrated simultaneous attack on the world's biggest superpower by a terrorist organization, or whether you look towards the realms of conspiracy and believe that, the said superpower contributed in any way. But that doesn't matter now. But what the West will not want is for such states and organizations to be in possession of nukes. And that's it. That's the bottom line. And now that brings me to the subject of today, because, guys, it's important to always look at the bigger picture. What has happened this week isn't just about the electronic devices exploding in and around people in Lebanon. There was a much bigger agenda happening here. If you have been following the current activities happening in the Middle East over certainly the last year, but over the last 2 years, then you'll know the battles and conflicts they've been happening between the West and various sort of terrorist organizations in that region, starting with Hamas in Gaza, crossing the Israeli border and slaughtering 1,200 Jews. And let's not forget the retaliation for that event by Israel, who have slaughtered thousands of Palestinians in revenge for what had happened. We then have the Houthis attacking Western container ships in various shipping lanes in response to the Gaza war. And now we have Israel targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon. In the eyes of the West, Hamas, Houthis, or the Houthis, and Hezbollah are all terrorist groups and organizations, and it's as simple as that. Now, as I said a couple of minutes ago, look at the bigger picture, and we have to understand that Iran have to shoulder some of the responsibility in that they fully fund all three of these terrorist organizations, which is fine. Terrorist organizations will always receive funding from somewhere in support for their beliefs and their work. But, and this is a big but, Iran are pretty much in possession of nuclear weapons. Either they've developed their own, they've nearly developed their own, and or they're in possession of nukes provided to them from other countries such as Russia, North Korea, and even China. And with that in mind, the conflict in the Middle East is a war against terror initially, or certainly in the eyes of the public domain. So that means that the West need to take out Iran. That would certainly stem, the funding and support to the terrorists. But more importantly, they need to disarm or disable Iran's capability to use any such nukes. The attacks in Lebanon this week are preemptive strikes before a much larger conflict designed to sort of disable, disarm, and weaken the enemy before going in. Israel's attacks this week have disabled up to 3,000 terrorists, specifically pinpointing the individual members and causing maximum damage on the ground and in the very hands of Hezbollah. Israeli troops have been seen today sort of moving into northern Israel, readying themselves for an all-out attack. But as I've said, just remember what the bigger picture here is, guys. To suck in and draw Iran into this conflict. Well, that's what I believe. Okay, so I say about this bigger picture, it's the bigger picture that I see, but then that's only through my analysis, data collection and filtering, of articles in news and events that have happened over the last 1 to 2 years. Back in April 2024 of this year, there was an incident that happened following various attacks between Hamas, Iran, and Israel. And it was an attack on Israel by using approximately 300 missiles and drones. I was up early in the morning, 300 hours or 3 a.m. Here in the UK, and logged onto a laptop listening to an activity of an event that started unfolding and was being tracked online by anybody that was listening. At that time, it sounded like Israel were on the verge of, or at least considering, a massive strike on Iran. Nuclear code options and Skymaster emergency alert messages were being broadcasted between various American nuclear forces and personnel, both in the air and on the ground. But again, I don't work in intelligence, government, nor the military. So, we don't know what was really going on that night back in April. What I can say, though, is that the military personnel broadcasting some of those messages sounded somewhat concerned whilst determining whether or not what they were going through was a real life scenario, or they were just test messages being sort of received and sent. Anyway, off the back of that night, I believe, and again, guys, this is only my opinion, I think that there's going to be, I don't know, an F-35 or two on their way to Iran to drop an EMP over Iran. And right at the last minute, during that session, because that session back in April, it went on for about 3 or 4 hours. But this is what I believe happened. There was one or two F-35s flying towards Iran with the intention to drop an EMP over Iran. And right at the last minute, it sounded like the mission was aborted, maybe by the Americans, telling Israel to stand down or whatever the situation. And with that now, I've been under the assumption that an EMP is going to be used in the Middle Eastern conflict. And that brings me to what has happened over the last couple of days in Lebanon. For anyone, or certainly most of the people carrying pages in Lebanon this week, done so because it was an alternative method of communication to, let's say, using your mobile or smartphone. You have to ask yourself why someone is carrying a pager for communication instead of a smartphone. Unfortunately, there were and are always innocent casualties of war, and sometimes it just cannot be avoided. If there were 3 to 4 thousand pages detonated this week, then the detonation would have been sort of initiated, I would say, via making some kind of phone call or sending a call message out to those pages via the allocated cell number. It's like a cell number they have. It's similar to, it's similar to how they used to sort of detonate IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a trigger mechanism better known as a command initiator. Other types of detonation would have been sort of victim operated IEDs or suicide bombs or pull and trip, or they had sort of pressure release, movement sensitive, and others. But we're talking about command initiators. Now, the signal or message would have been sent out in batches of numbers, hence detonation sort of being triggered simultaneously or in phases. Intelligence would have confirmed that most of these pages were in the pockets or of individuals that were members of and or affiliated to Hezbollah, in the eyes of the West, a terrorist organization. There is a question and a message being delivered here this week. The question is, are the West trying to push Iran to retaliate so that they can have a reason to strike Iran? And or is the message here that we can take out even without the use of an EMP, but if we use an EMP, then what you're experiencing now, and when I say this, what the Lebanese or Hezbollah are experiencing now with the electronic devices is only a taste of what an EMP would do to any individuals on the ground, and also the impact that that would cause the country's critical infrastructure. So what I'm trying to say here is, is the message being delivered here that, because there has been talk of an EMP being used in the Middle East. So which country has not been specified, but there's just been talk about it. So once that seed has been sown, then that's probably the seed that's been sown in the back of my mind. I believe that there is, a plan to use an EMP. But these events this week you kind of look at it and think, well, an EMP would cause this kind of event anyway. So I'm not suggesting an EMP's gone off because that actually isn't the case. But what I'm trying to say is the symptoms of an EMP attack is similar to what's happened this week, and it's like a message is being delivered to say, listen, guys, you know that EMP's been mentioned, and this is a taste of what's to come if you want to go down that road. That's where I see it. Okay, but again, guys, this is just my opinion. I said this in my last video, guys. Countries in the Middle East they're nowhere near on par in terms of technological advancements, military capabilities, and sheer combat power of that of the West. And it is. I'm not being horrible or anything like that, guys. It's as simple as that. I'm not here to offend anyone. I always look at the facts and figures. I spend a lot of time analyzing data, trying to sort of verify everything at all costs. And I'll make, any of my opinions based on those metrics. We have to look at the facts and figures, leave religion, beliefs, and assumptions out of it just for a minute. No disrespect to the Middle East, but they're way behind in many areas, not just the military, but technology, economies, financially, politically, and the list goes on. That doesn't make either side better or worse than the other. It simply means that when it comes to combat, then, we have to weigh up all of those many metrics that I'm talking about. There are technologies out there that you and I we'd be blown away by if, in fact, we knew anything about them. There are two realities, and there are two realities and two worlds that we live in here, guys. There is the world of bullshit for some, it is beliefs, social media influences, even the, the wokes, the snowflakes, and whatever other media platform people out there are promoting themselves on. There are now thousands of labels that humans, certainly in the West, can now label themselves with, just to make themselves feel better, and also, sort of provide them with reasons why such things are happening in their lives and around them. The internet, crypto, AI, you've got the dark web, and the Internet of Things have all spawned this new sort of platform of cyber warfare. Society has fallen into a fucking large hole of bullshit. And the deeper you fall, guys, the more confused they're becoming. And, they're becoming so confused to the extent whereby they don't even know whether they're male or female. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. Hopefully you get my sort of drift, guys. And then there is the real world: war, conflict, abuse, murder, corruption, deception, politics, and the list goes on. So for me, I can sit here and go on about, someone in the bullshit world going on about how, they have labeled themselves with whatever conditions best suits, their self-belief and their lives, worried about how they look and what everybody else is thinking and saying about them. People that now have no real sort of direction in life, not sure where they're going or what they're doing, and again, confused human beings struggling with the realities of life. I followed the Ukraine war for nearly 940 days now. I've tracked a lot of it on various social media platforms and other sites. I have watched certainly many, many videos of dead soldiers. Soldiers that are laid in the middle of the streets with cats and dogs eating away at the corpses. Watching videos on soldiers on the battlefield blowing their own heads off in favour of being taken as a POW or prisoner of war by the other side. Soldiers dragging themselves across the ground with, their legs and half of their torsos blown away. Others cutting the throats and torturing their captives, and the list goes on. And why am I watching this content? I'll hear you saying, because it's real. If we're going to be sat on any of these platforms talking about war and conflict, then at the very least understand exactly what that means. It's pain, it's suffering, it's death, and it's fear. The fear you see in the eyes of some of these soldiers, knowing that they've either got no choice but to take their own lives, or it's going to be taken by someone else, is an absolute wake-up call. It's as simple as that. And that's why you need to stay away from that mainstream if you want to sort of know what's really going on in the world. Now, guys, I'm not trying to be morbid or anything like this. Remember, the reason for this channel and the content that we're talking about is war and conflict, and there's nothing nice about it. Okay, so don't. Anyway, I'm going to explain something in a minute, and I shouldn't have to be kind of giving you guys any warnings. But as a prepper, part of my preparedness is conditioning my mind for real world situations. We can all sit in front of our screens, watching all these videos online, telling us how to, better prepare for an SHTF situation. But no one is telling you what that could actually look like and what it could mean to you and your family. When humans turn on each other and do so for survival, it can be or it will be brutal. If you've never seen death before, and let's be honest, most people haven't, then that in itself will be a massive shock when you first sort of experience it. You're not going to see real dead bodies on TV or mainstream news in fear of now offending somebody or upsetting somebody. We see it all the time now, before and after programs and films on TV. We're warned that the film you're about to watch contains violent guns, bad language, sex, and all the other real life actions. if a TV program has discussed or the actors and actresses have played the parts of people suffering from certain illnesses or who have, I don't know, gone through real life situations, you're now always provided with links and phone numbers at the ends of those programs to help support anyone who may have been affected by anything that they've just seen or heard on that program. Society is being weakened, being kept behind closed doors, not being told the truth, made to label themselves with these names and conditions that never existed a few years ago, and the list goes on. Let me tell you something, ladies and gents. None of that shit is real. And what it's basically doing is it's weakening sort of you as a person. And of course, I'm not suggesting that you should go off and start watching cats and dogs eating dead corpses on the streets of the Ukraine or anything like that. What I am saying though is just because you're not reading about it on Facebook, Instagram, and all of that other bullshit platforms that are out there doesn't mean it's not happening. And also, don't think for 1 minute, guys, that just because you haven't seen or experienced anything horrible in your life, that it's not likely to happen to you. I've gone off track a little bit again. I tend to do that in these videos with a couple of more minutes of your time and then we're done. Um, but I just want to summarize. Look at the bigger picture, ladies and gents. Don't get sucked into the bullshit being presented on all of these false platforms that are there to deflect and confuse you, whether that be war and conflict or just information about life in itself. Once you wake up to the real world, you will see a whole lot clearer. You will see through all of the bullshit, hopefully, and with that, you will better place yourself to prepare. And that will be to prepare for anything that may end up impacting your life and your family's lives. I believe, and this is only my opinion again, but I believe there's going to be an all-out war in the Middle East, which could easily result in the use of a nuke and or an EMP. Personally, I think it's going to be an EMP, as I've just said. You know, there's yeah, most people. Right, okay, so I'm in the UK. So anyone in the UK, they're going to be sat here listening to this and thinking, well, how's that ever going to impact me? Iran, I believe, or let's say the Middle East. Okay, we're talking about the Middle East being 3,700 miles away. But even the use of an EMP over in the Middle East, if the Israelis are to blame, which they will be, everyone will finger point the Israelis. The Middle East as a collective will probably impose an oil embargo on the West, that including the UK. And an oil embargo will have an impact on, on you if you drive a car that is not electric. You'll find yourselves queued up in long queues outside petrol stations across the whole country. And you might even find yourselves holding a ration book in your hands. So not only do you get to the petrol station, get some petrol, but you're rationed as well. Now, if you think that's a load of fucking bullshit and I'm talking a load of crap, the last time the UK government imposed rationing boundaries on oil or petrol, shall we say, it was back in 1973. So, it wasn't that long ago. Guys, what I'm trying to say is that just because, the Middle East, we're talking about the Middle East and we're talking about pages, exploding in people's pockets. And what I'm trying to say is just take a step back, look at the bigger picture and see what the hell's going on here. Because, the shit's going to hit the fan in the Middle East. Okay, it's on the cards. There's a reason for it. And again, I've just said the West are not going to have a terrorist state, that being Iran or any of those others, in possession of nuclear weapons. Okay, that's it. That's a death sentence in itself. Okay, so that just cannot be allowed to happen. And what they'll do is they'll do anything to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, so that's all I'm saying. I'm not, guys. I'm not even making this up. I mean, this would be a great story if I was just making this up. I'm not making this up. You're seeing it unfold in front of your eyes. Okay, so it's there. It's happening. But what I am also saying is that just because it's over there, it doesn't mean it's not going to impact us here. Okay. So anyway, going off track again. That's the oil embargo, 1973. That affected us here in the UK. People were queued for miles and miles and miles in their cars, with their petrol ration books in their hands. Okay, so that wasn't long ago at all. So for any of you that feel that this war also in the Ukraine isn't going to be affecting us here in the UK, you better think again. 100% it will affect you, especially when or if it spills over into any of the neighboring sort of countries in Europe, and or if a tactical nuke is used on a counterforce or countervalue target in any of those countries in Europe. And you better believe it, guys, the United Kingdom is also 100% a target for Russia right now. Enough of my bollocks. Um, That'll do for me for now. Apologies, that kind of went on a little bit longer than it should have. I just wanted to sort of talk briefly about the events in the in Lebanon this week. This is a major escalation, guys, but one the West are provoking and orchestrating because the bigger picture that we've spoken about. So get yourselves military fit, get yourselves in infantry aware. Have a good day, ladies and gents, and I'll catch up with you soon.